Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Tournament Podcast. I am Marty, alongside my brothers, Tom and Mike. We are very excited, not only for, as Tom is showing right there, our Cincinnati Bengals with the first playoff win in, is it 31 years? So we are pumped and excited on the heels of the Cincinnati Bengals' huge playoff win. Mike's rocking the hat. Tom's got the shirt. I've got Bengals underwear on.
Oh, behind you.
You got.
Oh yeah.
Thank you. Where is
Over
it?
there? Yep.
There's my Carson Palmer, Chad Johnson, TJ Hushmanzada, and the kicker. Who was
Shane
Graham?
Graham.
Yeah.
Oh,
And the Cincinnati Bengals
the
autographed
kicker.
mini foot and the Cincinnati Bengals Santa. But anyway,
For a period of time, he was the best kicker in NFL history, I believe. That kicker.
yeah, that kicker. So we are very excited on the heels of our Bengals historical playoff win and bringing you guys another episode of the Tournament Podcast. And this week, we're going to do something a little bit different here. This is going to be the biggest busts in sports history.
Wow.
I have gone through several different websites and lists to kind of come down with what I felt were the 8 biggest busts in sports history. Now, obviously, keeping this to 8, there are a lot of individuals who didn't make this list that probably should have. So technically we could do a part 2, part 3, part 4. It could be ongoing with this. And this isn't meant to, poke fun at these individuals, because a lot of these people are on here due to injuries or other, unfortunate circumstances. However, when you're drafted typically really high, the expectation is you're going to be, a superstar. So that's what we're doing here. The biggest draft busts in sports history. And here are the 8 participants. We have Ryan Leaf, Jamarcus Russell, Sam Bowie, Kajana Carter, Greg Oden, Darko Milicic, Matt Bush, and Brian Taylor. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with, the last 2 entries, Matt Bush and Brian Taylor. They are both in MLB. So I didn't know if you guys were actually familiar with them. But so we've got football, basketball, and some baseball. All of the names have been thrown into our proprietary tournament generator, and we are ready to go here. The first matchup we have is Jamarcus Russell going against Matt Bush.
Wow.
So with Jamarcus Russell, I think anybody who follows NFL was aware of Jamarcus Russell. Let's see, where was he drafted? Jamarcus, where were you drafted? He was the first overall pick in 2007. So being the first overall pick, it's kind of presumed that you're going to be a superstar. He played 3 seasons in Oakland, and to say it was lackluster would be probably an understatement. And he may have been a backup on another team after that, but Jamarcus Russell was a flash in the pan. He's going up against, in the first round here, Matt Bush. Matt Bush was one of the biggest prospects in baseball, maybe history at the time, with the San Diego Padres. And he was drafted, let's see, was he also a first overall pick in the MLB draft.
It looks like he was.
And he had battles with, it looks like, substance abuse. He tore a ligament in his elbow, missed 2 seasons. He was released by the Padres in 2009 after he assaulted 2 high schoolers in a drunken rage. And he had some other issues with drinking as well after that. So our first matchup, we have Jamarcus Russell versus Matt Bush. Who was the biggest bust? Mike, would you want to take this one first?
Sure. I was just kind of looking at both men here, but this one's actually fairly easy for me. Yeah, I mean, Matt Bush, I'm assuming because of his issues off the field, maybe part of it was the injuries as well. Yeah, he was drafted, it looks like, first overall in the 2004 draft, but he didn't actually make his MLB debut until 2016 at the age of 30. So what, 12 years after he was drafted, he didn't actually make his debut in the majors. And I'm not sure why that is, but like I said, he did have issues off the field. He had injuries that kind of held him back, where, as far as I know, Jamarcus Russell did not have any of those things. He just underperformed, unfortunately. And again, first overall, and for whatever reason, that more of a light is shown on you, especially in football, when you're first overall versus being a first overall draft pick that turns out to be a bust in baseball. Maybe it's because of the number of guys that are drafted in the MLB draft. I don't know what it is, but first overall is a bigger deal, at least in my opinion, in football and in the NBA. So yeah, I mean, Jamarcus just, unfortunately for him, didn't get it done. Like I said, being the first overall pick in the NFL draft is a pretty big deal, and he didn't have anything that held him back as far as injuries or off the field issues. So he just underperformed. So for me, I'm going to go with Jamarcus Russell.
All right. I'll just go next on this, and I actually agree with Mike on this one with Russell, and sort of for the same reasons that Mike said. With Matt Bush, he got unfortunately caught up in drugs and alcohol. Terrible decisions as a young man, and I think that was the basis for his falling apart. He did tear a ligament in his elbow, several years later. But Jamarcus Russell, as Mike said, I'm not aware of any other, issues with him as far as any off the field. His was all basically just not performing, like Mike said. So just due to that fact that it was just based on, his athletic performance alone, I agree. I'm going to go with Jamarcus Russell on this one. Tom, what do you think?
Well, I'll say out of the gate, I agree with both of you. So Jamarcus Russell will be moving on. I looked up Matt Bush and got a little bit of background. I never heard the name until you just brought it up. So, but I do want to throw in, if either of you heard the story about Jamarcus Russell when they drafted him and they were trying to get his input on the playbook?
I don't know. It sounds kind of familiar, but
well,
yeah, I was going to say I've heard something, or if I remember, wasn't it too many plays, or it was?
Well, no, I'll share it quickly. And for those watching that haven't heard, and I'm just going to paraphrase it. There's a video online where one of his teammates tells it, and it is hilarious. And this was just one of the things. And they said, "Oh my God, we knew right away we were in trouble taking Jamarcus Russell." So what they did was they started training camp and the offensive coordinator compiled a DVD of, like, I don't know, a certain amount of plays. Then he gave it to Jamarcus Russell. He said, take this home, watch these plays, tell me what you think. Are there some that you're comfortable with? Would you like us to incorporate in the playbook? Things you don't want us to do, let me know. So Jamarcus Russell took it home, came into practice the next day and was like, all the plays are great, coach. I like them. Let's do them all. And the coach like, are you sure? You sure you're okay with all the plays that were on the DVDs? Like, I'm good with all of them. Put them in the playbook. Let's go. Well, little did Jamarcus Russell know the coach gave him a blank DVD to test him. So Jamarcus didn't even look at it. So they said they knew right out of the gate the first few days they were in big trouble, and it panned out they were in big trouble. A terribly wasted pick. A guy that I think during the draft, Mel Kiper Jr. said would be like the next Joe Montana, Tom Brady, etc. So, yeah, certainly Jamarcus moves on in this matchup.
Out of LSU, maybe someday the Bengals will draft an LSU quarterback that'll win them a playoff game. Maybe.
All right, we've got Jamarcus Russell moving on. The next matchup we have here is Kajana Carter.
Nice.
Versus Ryan Leaf. And Kajana Carter is pretty significant to us. But anyway, Kajana Carter versus Ryan Leaf. And Tom, would you like to take that one first?
Yeah. And I think this is going to follow the sort of the way the first matchup followed in my book. I'm going on complete memory here. I haven't looked anything up. But Kajana Carter, I believe, now was he the first pick in the draft?
Kajana
was. Yeah.
Was
first overall in 95. And
okay. So, and I thought he was, and his deal was, I think he got hurt in preseason during a preseason game, a knee possibly, and was done. No, I don't think ever played for the Bengals if memory serves. So that was injury related, where Ryan Leaf again was just not good. I mean, Ryan was the second pick in the draft. I think Peyton was 1 and Ryan was 2. But I mean,
he was.
Again, if you're taking 1 or 2 or 5, I mean, you just like, with us and Jamar Chase, you expect the guys to be good. We didn't know Jamar was going to be this good, but you expect them to be good. Ryan Leaf should have been, leading a team and going to playoffs with the number 2 pick. So obviously way below expectations for Ryan Leaf. Mentally, I think he had trouble handling. Well, he did have trouble handling everything that came with being the starting quarterback of the Chargers. So yeah, Ryan Leaf clearly gets the nod in my opinion here.
All right. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm again, kind of looking at both guys to refresh my memory here. Kajana actually did play.
No.
Well, he was with the team for 4 years. The last 2 years were definitely injury plagued, and he only played 1 game in 98, 3 games in 99. So those last 2 years, he
no wonder I forgot that he played for the Bengals.
But the first 2 years, in 96 and 97, he did play pretty much the whole season. Didn't have yardage wise, he wasn't too impressive. I mean, 264 in 96, 97 was 464. So the yardage wasn't real impressive. I mean, he had 8 touchdowns and 7 touchdowns respectively each of those 2 years. So he did get into the end zone. Ryan Leaf, on the other hand, especially his first year, did not get into the end zone much. He completed a lot of passes to the other team, let's say, because goodness gracious, he threw 2 touchdowns to 15 interceptions. His second season, 11 touchdowns to 18 interceptions. And then the third year, 1 touchdown to 3 interceptions. So, man, his touchdown to INT ratio was not very impressive. Oh, man. So I just, like I said, Kajana for me at least did a little more So the yardage for what was supposed to be a star running back wasn't there, but at least he did get into the end zone, got him some touchdowns. But Ryan Leaf, the big deal I think he was coming out. It was a toss up between him and Peyton. Obviously, the Colts made the right decision, but I'm sure there was some thought put into that, and maybe at the time it was a tough decision between the two. But yeah, Ryan Leaf. Oh no, I gotta pick Ryan Leaf to move on.
All
And it
right.
is amazing. Just a quick caveat before Marty goes. I really didn't think Kajana Carter, it's how memory can skew. And it really wasn't that long ago, 1996. But yeah, to my memory, he never played. And that's crazy. So yeah, interesting.
He wasn't overly productive, but
No, not at all.
But in Leaf's case, it's one thing to be the running back, but when you're the starting quarterback and all that weight's on your shoulders, and he underperformed like that, it's magnified 10 times. So, Brian Leaf.
For me, I'm going to agree with you guys as well. And for me, it's pretty much kind of the same basis as the last. Pardon me.
Oh no.
It's kind of the same basis as the last one for me, based on, did injuries play into it, or was it just underperformance? With Kajana Carter, he did have an injury plagued career. Like Mike said, he played, I think, pretty much the first 2 seasons, but then the next 2 seasons, he might have played a total of like 4 or 5 games or something for the Bengals.
Yeah, I think it was 1 game in 98 and 3 and 99. So 4 games over 2 years.
4 games over 2 years. Yeah. So, he was, I believe it was his knee that he blew out. So, he did have those injuries. With Ryan Leaf, like Tom said, I do believe it was primarily the mental game. He just wasn't, mentally mature enough or, stable enough to handle, that situation. Ryan Leaf only had 3 seasons in the league. And
look at those stats. He's lucky he got 3.
Yeah, the stats are different than when I looked on Wikipedia. Ryan Leaf has spent several years in prison for different things. I didn't know that until just now. So poor Ryan Leaf is struggling. But I agree with you guys. It's going to be Ryan Leaf. So the next matchup we have here is an All-NBA, Darko Milicic against Sam Bowie. I'll go ahead and I'll take this one first. Darko Milicic, let's see here. Darko, where did you go on me? Okay, he was the number 2 overall pick in 2003. That year, coincidentally, who was taken number 1 was somebody who's kind of still around. His name is LeBron James. But Darko Milicic got drafted, big guy, stature-wise, 7 feet tall, from Serbia. He was one of those guys that was to have a well-rounded game on him. He was in the league for many, many years. Let's see, like 8 years maybe or so. I don't know. But his stats, his career total, 6 points and 4 rebounds. So you've got a guy who was the number 2 pick, who's a 7-footer, who was known to have a great all-around game. Career average 6 points, 4 rebounds. So right there, I think, that tells you why he's in this list. So he was in the league for 9 seasons. Sam Bowie, is a little more of an old school. Sam Bowie is he's the number 2 overall pick, and he's always going to be tied in the history of the NBA because Sam Bowie was picked before Michael Jordan. So Portland Trailblazers changed NBA history with that. Now, Sam Bowie was he was in the league. Let's see here. He was in the league also for a few years. But yeah, he was injury ridden to beat the band. Let's see, what did he have? Like 6 or 7 total seasons. His averages are 10 points a game, 7 total rebounds. So a number 2 pick. Again, he was 7'1". He was from Kentucky. So he was a huge deal at that time coming out of college. So to me, this is a little more of a difficult one, but Sam Bowie, even though he was a number 2 pick, I would say he was serviceable. The first few years in the league, he had 2 seasons where 87 and 88, where he only played 5 games due to injury. But then later in his career, he played a good amount. And he had 1 season where he had 15 points a game, 8 rebounds. So he was more than serviceable. So for me, just based on the performance and the stats of these 2 guys, I'm going to say the bigger bust was Darko Milicic. Mike, what would you say on this one?
I would agree. Yeah, like I said, both guys were underwhelming, but at least in Sam's case, he did put up almost 11 points a game, 7.5 rebounds, and he was injury plagued. I forget if it was leg or foot issues that hindered him, but I know he had some recurring issues with either his foot or his leg. But as far as I know, Darko didn't really have any issues. He just didn't perform up to the expectations that I'm sure the Pistons had for him when they drafted him. And yeah, like being, 7 feet tall and only averaging just over 4 rebounds. So basically 4 rebounds a game, 6 points a game when you're 7 feet tall. And yeah, that's not going to get it done. So, just like you said, Sam at least was serviceable. He averaged, said over 11 or almost 11 points a game, 7.5 rebounds. So the numbers were better than Darko's. And yeah, I think it does hinder poor Sam sometimes too, the fact that he was drafted before Michael. Like I said, that always kind of looms over him as well. So, but then with the injuries and stuff, I'm going to go with Darko because, again, I don't think he had anything like that really hindered him. He just didn't get it done. So I agree. Darko will move on unless Tom uses his veto.
Yeah. Are you passionate enough that...
Speaking of which, I don't think, just a reminder, because I don't think we've mentioned it yet this episode, but every week for our traditional tournament style episodes, we do each have a veto that we can use. So if, for example, Tom and Marty say they would have picked Darko, but I felt strongly about Sam moving on, I could use my veto to move on Sam, but we only get 1 veto a week. So you got to be smart when you use it, because once you use it, it's gone. And again, we all have a veto in our back pocket. So if we don't agree with who's moving on, we can veto the other 2 and move our pick on. So
thank you for mentioning that. And we did mention late last year, that we were going to discuss whether the veto would be allowed in the championship matchup. So real quick, I would like to say I think it should not be allowed. Do you guys agree?
I do. I think
agree,
we shouldn't
yeah.
allow it.
yeah.
Second and thirded? It's official, guys.
Yep.
We cannot use the veto in the championship matchup.
Now, if I would have disagreed, could I have used my veto on that?
Maybe, but I
I
would
would have used my veto.
Me too.
Damn it.
So it worked. The democratic process. All right, Tom, Darko Milicic against Sam Bowie.
Sam Bowie. Well, when you first announced these names, the 8 people that were going to be, randomly tossed into this tournament, then you said Sam Bowie. I thought to myself, I didn't ever think Sam Bowie was a bust. And kind of looking at these stats, I mean, yeah, I think Sam Bowie had a nice career. I mean, 11 points, 7.5 boards. I mean, it's not what you expected out of him when they took him so high in the draft. But you can all, I mean, it was more of a big man's league back then too. And you could see the number 1 pick that year was Hakeem, followed by Sam, then Michael, then another big and Sam Perkins. So, and then actually Charles Barkley was 5th that year. But I can see where they would have taken Sam Bowie. It made sense. However, going back to the Darko Milicic draft, LeBron James going first to the Cavaliers made all the sense in the world. However, I thought for sure number 2, being a Bearcats fan and seeing a lot of this guy, Dwayne Wade, I was stunned at the time when they said Darko Milicic. I'm like, why wouldn't Detroit take Dwayne Wade? Who are these people that are evaluating talent? I'm just a guy at home watching basketball, and I can tell you Dwayne Wade's great. Turned out he was an all-time great, and they really messed up on that one. Carmelo was 3rd. I'm not a big Carmelo fan. And then Chris Bosh. And like I said, Dwayne Wade was 5th. So a lot of people passed on Dwayne. But I don't think Sam was really a bust. Again, it was injuries where I just think Darko just wasn't that good. Should have never been taken 2nd. I don't know what they were thinking. So I'm going to agree with you guys, and Darko is moving on.
Nice. So far, we've all been, unanimous. And the last matchup of this first round is going to be Greg Oden versus Brian Taylor. And again, Brian Taylor is he was a first overall pick by the Yankees. Mike, did you want to take this one first?
Sure. I'm actually, because I will admit I'm not too familiar with the name Brian Taylor, but yeah, I do see where. Did he ever actually play in the majors? Well, it's obviously I'm much more familiar with Greg Oden, out of the Ohio State University. Had a heck of a college career. Unfortunately, again, like so many of these other guys, injuries really derailed his professional career. He missed his entire rookie season. To give a little background here, he missed his entire first year with a knee injury. He played sparsely in his 2nd and 3rd years in the league, and then he missed the next 3 years with knee injuries again, and then he came back 1 more year. So yeah, poor Greg, out of his 6 seasons on an NBA roster, missed 4 of them due to injury. So he only played 3 seasons, and 2 of those he played less than 25 games. So yeah, poor Greg. Brian Taylor, I said I'm not too familiar with him, but so I'm not really sure what hindered him, if it was the play or if his was off the field or what it was. But yeah, he didn't even get to the majors. It doesn't look like. He spent 8 or 9 years in the minors. I mean, his stats weren't great. He was a starting pitcher, it looks like, but yeah, the stats, I guess, I can see why he was never brought up to the MLB roster. But poor Greg, just because, again, like I said, because the injuries that hindered him, not as much, his play. You don't know what he would have done had he been able to stay healthy all those years. But again, with Brian Taylor, he didn't even get to the professional level or the majors. So just for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and go with Brian Taylor.
Brian Taylor. All right. And Tom, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think I'm going to put you on the hot seat with this because I'm leaning Greg Oden. And I don't know, my criteria might be a little out of whack here, but I think when it comes to baseball, it doesn't detract that Brian Taylor was a bust, the number 1 overall draft pick in 1991. And I guess that was the June amateur draft. I guess baseball has multiple drafts. Baseball has multiple levels. There's what, single A, double A, triple A, the majors, probably other things thrown in there too. So it doesn't say or mean that he wasn't a bust. You can afford to miss a lot more in baseball with, basically you're picking from 5 or 6 lower level teams to build your roster and then your free agency, et cetera. Where in the NBA, I mean, you do have the G League now. Back then you didn't. And then your, whatever it is, your 12-man roster. So you got to be a lot more careful when it comes to the NBA. Again, because I don't know much about Brian Taylor, and I say I don't know much. I don't know anything about him. I've never heard of him until this show. But I do know Greg Oden well, from college in Ohio State and up through the NBA. I saw him quite a bit. So, and again, what he was supposed to be, and let's take a look here in terms of, the number 1 overall draft pick. Again, I know Brian Taylor was also the number 1 pick, but in basketball, just like in the NFL, if you're the number 1 pick, you are like Hall of Fame is what you're looking at here. That's what they're expecting you to be. Oh God. And Greg Oden was taken as the number 1 pick, followed by Kevin Durant. So that was a mistake. Then nobody else really jumps off the page as like a KD level of player here, but yeah, just crazy. And really, out of the first 21 picks in the draft, Ohio State had 3 guys taken that year. So anyway, just probably because I know more about Greg Oden, I know more about the NBA than I do baseball, and know zero about Brian Taylor, I'm going to go with Greg Oden. So it's going to be 1-1 here, and
Wow.
Marty on the hot seat.
All right. Okay. So here we go. Yep, our first little bit of suspense here. I'll just start out. I think it's safe to say that the 3 of us are more into NFL and NBA and college than we are MLB. But Brian Taylor, yeah, he was like a big deal in 91 overall, first overall pick. He got over a $1 million contract. He did pretty well, looks like, in AAA, but then in 1993, he got into a drunken bar fight and I guess really messed up his shoulder. So after that, he couldn't recover. He was released a few years later. So, basically, he got $1 million some, played well in AA, bar fight, he's pretty much done. Then we go to Greg Oden, who, Greg Oden, McDonald's All-American. He was a 7-footer as well. It was a big deal at Ohio State. Comes into the NBA. He played 6 seasons. And unfortunately for Greg, 4 of those seasons, well, he was in the NBA. 4 of the seasons he didn't play because of his knee. And I remember at the time, it's the first time I'd heard of it. He had that microfracture surgery. So poor Greg Oden was absolutely riddled with injuries, and when we talk about Brian Taylor, it again was kind of an it was an off the field situation, drinking, this bar fight that caused an injury that precipitated his downfall. So, man, I would say due to the fact that, he did start out in his career at, double A and showed a lot of promise. I'm going to say, and because he's a Yankee and the Yankees are baseball, I'm going to go with Brian Taylor as the bigger bust, unless Tom disagrees so much he uses his veto.
I do not. No, you can't. That's a tough call either way. So I'm certainly not going to use the veto. So Brian Taylor's going to move on.
Yep. So we've got our semifinals set here. We've got Jamarcus Russell going against Ryan Leaf in an all NFL, battle here. Tom, did you want to take this matchup? Jamarcus Russell, Ryan Leaf.
Yeah. And before I jump in, I will just say, if you've made it this far in the video, please go ahead and give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. We do really focus a lot on sports and entertainment. That's kind of our niche, or niche as I call it. But I'd say we're probably heavier sports, especially if you consider pro wrestling a sport, which, I mean, I do. So anyway, with that being said, this one is a pretty easy one for me. Again, I think Ryan Leaf made an effort. I think he just struggled mentally dealing with everything that came with quarterback, dealing with the press, of course, etc. Where Jamarcus just seemed like he didn't give a what. So I don't think it's certainly not the effort that needed to be there to be, a star quarterback in the league. I think Ryan tried and just didn't have the talent. Jamarcus, I don't think we know if he would have had the talent or not. But for just complete lack of effort and caring, seemingly, I'm going to go with Jamarcus Russell.
Mike, what are you thinking?
I think I'm actually gonna agree with Tom because, I know Ryan Leaf is always, tied, just kind of how you said about Sam Bowie being tied to Michael. Ryan Leaf's kind of tied to Peyton just because he was taken right after him, 1 and 2. But yeah, I agree with Tom. At least Ryan Leaf, as far as we know, gave a concerted effort. Whether it was the lack of maturity or what it was, just couldn't handle the, being the starting quarterback for an NFL team, where Jamarcus, showed right out of the gate that he couldn't be, made no effort, lying about watching a DVD full of plays right out of the gate. So he hadn't even hit the field yet, and he was already showing that he wasn't going to be the one to lead the team. So yeah, at least Ryan Leaf did make the effort. Clearly Jamarcus was not as concerned with doing so. So yeah, I agree with Tom. I'm going to go with Jamarcus, and plus Jamarcus, not that it's much of a difference. It's 1 and 2, but at least Ryan was second in the draft versus Jamarcus, who was first overall, and yeah, just didn't care, just thought he would breeze by apparently. But so I'm going to go with Jamarcus Russell to move on as well.
And I was just going to jump in real quick here, and I'll try to find a link to this video that I'm referring to where this teammate tells these stories. But in terms of leadership too, which you're really expecting, at least leadership when you take somebody that high, the guy also told a story of they had their little talent show where they make the rookies get on stage and do something, a skit. And I guess Jamarcus didn't want to do anything, so he just came in. He got up on stage with a duffel bag, unzipped it. It was full of cash. He must have thrown it and made it rain and just walked away.
Gosh almighty.
What a character.
Yeah.
Oh, gee,
well, I mean, Jamarcus Russell, 6'5" or 6'6", 260 pounds, he was a monster. He still ran a 4.740. His draft workouts were insane. And 2007, the year he was drafted, yeah, he didn't reach an agreement going into the season with him. So he didn't even go through training camp. And then in September, pretty close to, I guess, the season starting, or when does the NFL season start actually?
September.
I was
Yeah,
going to say that's probably right before the season started. He signed a
August.
6-year deal.
Oh.
So he started out having issues. He wasn't named the starting quarterback right away, but so Jamarcus, he struggled his first year. He only played 4 games, and he had 1 start, and 2 touchdowns, 4 INTs. Then the remaining 2 years for him, he had 13 touchdowns to 8 INTs, and then his last year, 3 touchdowns to 11 INTs. So, yeah, Jamarcus definitely struggled big time. Ryan Leaf was, also, not good. There's just no way you can sugarcoat it. He was in the league for 3 years as well, and had similarly bad, stats. So yeah, this one it's a close one, but yeah, based on the information that Tom is given, I did not know any of that with Jamarcus Russell, but based on his lack of effort, it sounds like I'm going to go ahead and agree with you guys. Jamarcus Russell, he will move on. And that brings us to our last semifinal matchup here. We have Darko Milicic versus Brian Taylor, draft pick of the Yankees. I will go ahead and I'll just do this one first. We talked about both of these guys. Darko, again, to me, one of the most glaring things about him is his size, being 7 feet tall or 7 foot tall, and a career average of under 3 rebounds a game. Or, well, I guess he had 4 rebounds a game is still just, for a 7-footer, it's atrocious. The 6 points, it's atrocious. Taylor, again, he started out really good in the minors, had the unfortunate incident at the bar, was injured, never recovered from that. But, Darko, to me, just seems like so much wasted potential. Maybe he wasn't as good as they thought. Obviously, he wasn't as good as they thought, but he was a big deal, the next big thing. But I'm gonna go with Darko Milicic on this one. Mike, what do you think?
Man, yeah, this is a tough one, but yeah, I was doing a little bit more research on Brian Taylor. I don't know if you had alluded this at any point. If so, I missed it and I apologize. But it says that Brian Taylor is one of only 2 players in MLB history to have been selected first overall in the draft and never make it to the majors. But again, it sounded like he had, the off the field issues with drugs and stuff. And so, yeah, he at least had some issues that hindered him unrelated to the game, where Darko, again, I don't think he had any issues. I mean, he was around for a good 10 to 12 seasons, bounced around with several different teams, which right there tells you in most cases, if you're going to all these different teams, there's probably a reason why. 6 points a game. Again, 4 rebounds, being 7 feet tall. It's just, not going to get it done. like I said, even though Brian was the first overall pick, never even sniffed the majors in the minors, he had a record of under 500. It was 22-30 with a earn run average over 5. So not great, but again, at least in his defense, he did have other issues that kind of affected his game, where as far as I know, Darko did not. So for that reason, I agree. I'm going to go with Darko.
All right, Tom, do you feel passionate enough that Brian Taylor should move on, or do you agree with Darko?
Well, obviously in the first round, I did not vote for Brian Taylor to move on, so I will continue that trend here. And I'm going to vote Darko. Again, Brian Taylor seems like he could have had potential and just made a bad choice. It seems like it all stemmed from that bar fight, which again, it's beyond me when you've got, millions of dollars on the table and you are hanging out in bars or doing other things you shouldn't be doing. It just boggles the mind. But, and I know, these guys got to live life, but you're held to a different standard when you're a millionaire athlete. You are. And if you don't like it, then go work for a company somewhere and, work your way up to a CEO. I mean, that's what it's all about. So, but Darko, he just, I don't think he had the skill set, should have never been taken that high in the draft. So I'm going to go with Darko.
All right. So that brings us to the finals matchup, which is going to be Jamarcus Russell against Darko Milicic. Let's see who will go first on this one. I believe Mike, if you'd like to take this first, the finals, Jamarcus Russell, Darko Milicic.
Sure. This one is actually fairly easy for me based on some of the stuff that we just touched on in the semifinals. Obviously both guys underwhelming, but again, at least Darko was in the league longer. Again, made an effort, even though he didn't really put up the numbers that, expectations at least said he should have put up. He at least, made the effort. He was in the league for, 10 to 12 years, where Jamarcus, again, obviously didn't even make the effort. The fact that he was around for 3 seasons based on some of the foolishness is, I don't even know how he lasted that long, but so yeah, just because of that, Darko put forth the effort. Jamarcus clearly did not. So I'm going to go with, I was about to say Darko. I'm about to go with Jamarcus as the biggest bust in sports history.
Oh, okay. So you are picking Russell?
Yeah, I was about to say
Okay.
Darko, but nope, I'm going with Jamarcus.
All right. Tom, what are you thinking here? Jamarcus and Darko.
I think it does boil down to just a matter of effort versus no effort whatsoever. And I have no doubt that Darko did the best that he could. Tried to be the best teammate he could, tried to provide something to the Pistons and whoever else he wound up with as his career progressed. But just again, not his fault that he was taken that high in the draft. He just didn't have the skill set to match up to it. And the GM of the Pistons, again, just I don't know what you were thinking. I really don't. And then you can say, well, it's easy to say in hindsight, but I mean, during that draft, I was watching that draft. I was a much bigger basketball fan back then, and it blew my mind. I had no idea what they were thinking. I don't even know if I knew the name. Darko, I call him Milicic, but Milicic, whatever. Darko.
That tells you
But
right
again,
there.
Yeah, Jamarcus, though, one good season at LSU, hyped up beyond belief. Again, I didn't really see it. Mel Kiper knows a lot more about football than I do, but the labels they were putting on this guy is the maybe the greatest quarterback that's ever lived, or at least potentially. And then for him to come in and just literally, there was no effort. Darko gave effort. Jamarcus just didn't care. He wanted to sign that initial deal and then just take his money and go. Really let his teammates down, the organization down. Really a laughing stock. So clearly in my book, this is Jamarcus Russell. And when you announced these 8 names and we were going to randomly drop them in a tournament, I thought, Jesus, how's anybody going to beat Jamarcus Russell? So, and I did send you a link to that video. So we'll have that down in the description, guys.
All right. So based on our new rules, I could not use my veto even if I disagreed. But I will agree with you guys. No suspense that Jamarcus Russell is, the biggest bust. And it's primarily based on the things that I, learned today. I knew he didn't pan out at all. And I know it might have been his second year. He came into the draft camp. I think he gained like 20-30 pounds, which, for professional athlete, that's, absurd to show up, to camp being that big. Yeah, he arrived to mini camp, it said, at 300 pounds.
Oh,
So
my.
he gained like 30 pounds, which, that's rough. Now here's of interesting note. Jamarcus played, his last season was 2009. He started 9 games, but in 2013, he was thinking about a comeback. I just wanted to throw that out there. So he was interested in a comeback, but I guess there was no interest. So I agree with you guys. No question, unanimously, the biggest bust in professional sports history goes to Jamarcus Russell. And again, if you guys have made it to the end of the video, we really appreciate it. If you could give us a like, that always helps with the YouTube algorithm. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. That would really help us here as a small channel that's trying to grow. And comment, let us know what you think. Again, I know there are tons of sports busts that weren't included here. It'd be impossible to have everyone in here, but I think this is a pretty good one. I think Jamarcus Russell is deserving of this title of biggest bust in professional sports history. Tom, Mike, do you guys have anything here to end the episode?
Yeah, I don't. I thought as soon as you mentioned the names, it would be Jamarcus. It turned out to be Jamarcus, and that's really sad that I kind of knew that out of the gate. Just, I don't know, anytime, even like recreationally, when we used to play basketball, I just feel that you're there for your teammates. And in these sorts of professional situations, the organization is put, it's like any of our employers, but almost to a higher level because there's millions of dollars at stake. I mean, I feel like I was letting people down if I didn't at least give an effort and try the best I could. And yeah, there was no real injuries with Jamarcus. It was just, he just didn't care about his teammates or the organization. And what a shame.
Yeah, I agree. But he will go down in history as the biggest bust in sports history. Why? Because the Tournament Podcast said so. But for my brothers, Tom and Mike, this is Marty. Thank you guys so much for watching. We will be back next week with another episode. See you guys.